The great illusion of security. Brazil is under attack, but there are no foreign tanks on our streets, nor fighter jets bombing our capitals. The enemy is already here at home. He wears a suit in luxurious offices or flaunts gold-plated rifles in the favelas and gang-controlled neighborhoods. He controls organized crime, arms trafficking, and tons of drugs that destroy families every day. But the question that no one has the courage to answer openly is, how did we get to this point? How did a continental country with one of the largest budgets in Latin America allow criminal factions to become true parallel states? The answer is as simple as it is frightening. Our borders are open.
The armed forces must have a minimum contingent of 1 million people, armed, trained, and capable of defending our homeland. And let's stop with this hypocrisy that we don't need armed forces. Look at what happened recently with Coente. Our main goal is to value the best thing we have, which is the Brazilian man. This fundamental thing, which is the human being who is being destroyed. Enough of assigning blame for everything. Under the military regime, everything was wrong. Everything before, during, and after 64, there was never any social concern in this country. The number of poor and illiterate people has been increasing year after year. Let's put an end to this. My name is Enéas. This rotten press, which defends shady anti-national interests, called me a Nazi and a fascist. Because I fight for my homeland, because I defend order, discipline, respect for national symbols, the armed forces, and Christian values, which are universal. In short, because I defend everything that humanity took millennia to build and that they are now desperately trying to destroy. That's why the press attacks me, because they're afraid of the truth. My name is Enéas.
Brazil does not produce coca leaves on an industrial scale. Brazil does not manufacture the AR-15 or AK-47 rifles that organized crime uses in Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, or the Amazon. Every gram of cocaine, every kilo of coca paste, every round of high-caliber ammunition that enters here crosses a land or river border. And why are our borders so unprotected? Recently, a report from CNN Brazil exposed the reality that many try to hide. On the front page, the headline read, "No beating around the bush, the government cuts funding and the army suspends action on the border against crime." It's in these moments, my brothers, that we remember several accusations from the opposition that many left-wing parties have benefited from large donations from organized crime. It's a fact, and we need to say this here, that until today, no one has proven anything. But with our institutions so rigged, would it really be possible to prove it if it were true? We will answer this and other questions after you go get that bread with boiled banana and clarified butter and a good cup of coffee, and we start our segment, Senhores do Mundo. Senhores do Mundo, when we see the CNN article published on June 8, 2026, that is, very recently. Don't make the mistake of thinking this is just a fiscal adjustment. This is not just a cash flow reshuffle. This is the latest chapter in a narrative of neglect, humiliation, and institutional disarmament that has been denounced for decades. The man was warning about this more than 20 years ago. His name was Enéas Carneiro. If you want to understand how the weakening of the armed forces is directly connected to the power of organized crime, stay with me and watch this video where Enéas speaks. The question will now be asked by the economist, Professor Marcos Coelho, Doctor.
Enéas, considering what has been discussed so far, is the survival of Brazil at risk? The armed forces are the armed branch of the people. They have the constitutional mission to defend the national patrimony. Why are they not fulfilling their mission?
That's a very serious question from the distinguished professor. Very serious. I was in the military for 8 years with great pride. I learned in the army the notion of order, discipline, and respect. Professor, the armed forces are dismantled. The military are earning starvation wages just like all the workers in Brazil.
And
as you move up through the ranks, people feel bad to see that there is a lack of participation. Because imagine if your excellencies, the military ministers, your excellencies, the ministers of the Army, Navy, and Air Force got together and went, for example, and said, President, for God's sake, is there a limit to this? Brazil is being destroyed. It's a lie that we're making progress in the world. All of this is a farce. So when you ask yourself why, I don't know how to answer. I don't know. I just know there's a very big risk in all of this. There's a risk of a rupture happening. Because the armed forces have always been the bulwark of order and love for the homeland. Because before anything else, the armed forces exist to defend, not the government, which is temporary, but to defend the homeland. A service member is a servant of the homeland, and the homeland is in danger.
Now let's look at the facts. The CNN Brazil report revealed that the Brazilian army had to interrupt crucial inspection and combat operations against transnational crime along the border due to a lack of basic resources. We're talking about fuel for patrols, vehicle maintenance, food logistics for the soldiers, and monitoring equipment. Try to imagine this scene: a land border stretching over 16,000 kilometers. As if that weren't enough, add this other piece of information to the picture. This border shares a boundary with the world's largest cocaine producers, Colombia, Peru, and Bolivia, a region dominated by the dense Amazon rainforest and gigantic rivers, which serve as real highways for international trafficking. Without the strong presence of the army, what is left in these regions? The answer is a vacuum. And in politics, just like in public security, a power vacuum doesn't stay empty. It is immediately filled by crime. There's the answer to why the country has become so violent. International organized crime doesn't operate like amateurs. Factions like the PCC and Comando Vermelho operate like multinationals of terror. They have logistics, international contacts, state-of-the-art weaponry, and billions of reais in cash on hand. The news that the army has cut operations at the border sounds like a welcome invitation, while enforcement against the PCC is suspended under the pretext of a lack of funding. With sneakers and boats loaded with drugs, they cross our rivers without any resistance. Tons of cocaine supply the domestic market and are exported through Brazilian ports to Europe, generating fabulous profits for crime. And with that money in their pockets, what do the factions buy? The answer is more weapons. Weapons that return to the streets to kill police officers, terrorize workers, and control entire territories in our cities. The math, my brother, is brutal. Less army presence at the border equals more drugs and more weapons in the cities. It's pure math. There's no magic, there's no in-between. I don't think it's an exaggeration on my part, or yours, if we both agree here that we, law-abiding citizens, are much more scrutinized and held accountable than the criminals themselves. If you drive your car or your motorcycle with expired documents, my dear brother, the chances of you losing that vehicle at a checkpoint are huge. Did you get an absurd fine and couldn't pay the vehicle tax? So for you, is there a big risk of losing that vehicle? When you're going to work, taking your wife somewhere or to the market, taking your kids to school, maybe rushing someone to the hospital, you have a greater chance, a higher chance than those traffickers, of getting caught at our borders since they're not being watched. And, as you saw in the report, funding is being cut, but the surveillance over you is increasing every day, getting more resources. There are smart cameras, facial recognition, and so on. Why aren't criminals held accountable, fought against, and prosecuted in the same way? I remember the prophecy of Enéas Carneiro. Many think that this neglect started yesterday, but history shows us that this is a long-term plan. In the 1990s and the early 2000s, a lone voice in the National Congress and on television debates cried out against the moral and material disarmament of Brazil. Enéas Carneiro was often ridiculed by the mainstream media for his energetic tone and direct style. Enéas used the limited TV time he had to issue far-reaching geopolitical warnings. A nation without armed forces is not a sovereign nation. It is a colony at the mercy of external interests and internal chaos.
Among the roles that the Constitution assigns to the armed forces is the defense of the homeland, of the national territory. Don't be naive to assume that in today's world, we can do without them. Take the recent example of the Gulf War, which started with the invasion of a small country. Brazil has continental dimensions, possessing underground wealth that makes it the richest country in the world. That's why there is so much interest from the major powers in our territory. Without well-equipped and technically well-prepared armed forces, with our ships carrying obsolete weaponry, and many of our planes grounded due to lack of supplies, with troops that are extremely underpaid and undervalued, disrespected by a corrupt press, what can the population expect from this current state of affairs? How can we awaken patriotism in our youth if the armed forces, the living embodiment of national discipline and order, are being increasingly vilified every day? What incentive could lead them to pursue a military career so that in the future we can guarantee the sovereignty of our homeland? How much longer, General, will someone who has spent his entire life under strict discipline, taking continuing education and advanced training courses, be forced to bow to the biting criticism of some semi-illiterate or resentful journalist who couldn't even learn or understand, at the very least, the notions of discipline, order, and respect? What, after all, is the point of all this? Haven't these same journalists realized yet that expressions like freedom of thought and freedom of the press are very beautiful and useful concepts for them and for politicians, but that they have nothing to do with the reality of the people? That the people don't write in the newspaper that what the people really want is food on the table, a house to live in, school for their children, job security, transportation, hospital medicine. It's time to stop this delusion of blaming all the nation's problems on the military government, which lasted 2 decades. It's important for the press to learn to respect the military, because only by respecting the armed forces will society have the guarantee of freedom and well-being achieved by the nation itself.
Enéas warned that Brazil was giving away its wealth and its security because it agreed to weaken its own army, navy, and air force. He said that the Brazilian military budget was a disgrace when compared to the size of our territory and the responsibility of protecting our natural resources, especially the Amazon. What Enéas predicted in the 90s is exactly what we are experiencing today. He warned that by disarming and disrespecting the armed forces, the Brazilian state would be opening the doors to control by parallel powers. Today, we see barracks with crippled budgets, outdated equipment, vehicles without maintenance, and soldiers without ammunition for proper training. The prophecy of Enéas Carneiro has come true to the letter. Without a strong and respected army, national sovereignty has become a joke. And the ones who control the country's borders are not the Brazilian state, but international trafficking bosses. Now, why does this historical lack of interest exist? And many times there are deliberate attacks against the armed forces. In Brazil, to understand this, we need to look at politics. 70 years of recent history show an open wound for sectors of the radical left and the political groups that have taken power in recent decades. The army was never seen as a state institution dedicated to the defense of the homeland. It was seen as a historical enemy that should be severely punished. There is a clear narrative of revenge, a historical payback for the period of the military regime ever since these groups consolidated their influence in the country's power structure and culture. The strategy was clear: to discredit, demoralize, and humiliate. But how do you do that? A centuries-old institution has always held the population's highest respect. Well, first, through financial suffocation, resources are cut for major strategic projects, such as border monitoring, the development of military technology, and the modernization of the border. Second stage, through the misassignment of duties and public humiliation. Let's pause for a moment and recall how many times you've seen news in recent years about Army troops being deployed. Not to protect our borders or carry out strategic intelligence operations, but to paint curbstones, clear weeds from roadsides, or fill potholes in the asphalt.
Our reporting team is here on Rio Arenos Avenue following the work that's being done, which is painting the curbs to beautify the city and make it look nicer. For the 26th Expo Vale, it's a partnership effort where the Army Training Unit lends a hand to help the city department. I'm here with the commander of the Army Training Unit, our friend Solano, who will talk to us about this initiative of bringing the trainees to the Avenue and making this contribution here. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Paulo. Good morning to the listeners of the radio and TV Amplitude. So some time ago, the mayor of the city reached out to me requesting, whether we were available to support City Hall in cleaning up the city. Not really for Expo Vale, but to improve the city's appearance. After the rainy season ended, the city became very dirty. So we, properly authorized by our command there, got in touch with them, and they authorized this partnership, together with the City Hall to carry out this cleaning effort. So it's a community action, a service that the Army usually provides for the population, right? So this activity we're doing here today is really valuable, isn't it? To really make the city a bit more presentable, already taking advantage of the 26th Expo Vale event. So we combine both activities, right? One on Saturday, which we carried out, which was support for the horseback parade. And today here, right, we're in this cleaning effort, a community action here, helping the City Hall to beautify the city for this event. So
thanks to our friend Solano, commander of the local Army Training Unit. Also here is the city secretary, Colonel Pereira, who is overseeing this work here together with the local Army Training Unit. Secretary, it's an important action, a partnership, and it fits perfectly with what you said when you took over the secretary position, right? To seek partnerships in order to carry out this work.
It's very important. This support, right, given by the Brazilian Army through our local Army Training Unit, this week is a very productive week. We had their support during the Acroval horseback ride and also in this period leading up to Acroval, the 26th Expo Vale. We will have support mainly in urban beautification, in beautifying our city, so the Brazilian Army once again proves to be our strong arm, our helping hand. Collaborating with the city, one of the first institutions to support our project to improve the image of our city with cleaning, bringing the necessary structures to improve the city's appearance.
Now, Secretary, let's talk about something here that's terrible. And people don't cooperate. They know how to demand. They know how to insist. Everyone has asked. The mayor has already asked. You've also asked. They just painted the curb, but someone washed the sidewalk and the paint came off. There's a lack,
including of respect for the work that's being done. So once again, I call on the population to actively participate in the entire process of improving the city.
Turning soldiers who are highly trained for war and territorial defense into cheap labor for secondary urban services. The symbolic goal of this, of course, is to show who's in charge, reducing the role of the soldier to a caricatured figure, stripped of power and the ability to act. When you take the budget away from the border and have the army paint the fence, you send a very clear message to organized crime. The way is open, you can go through. My noble and dear brothers, I'll give an example for those who can't understand this, because I've already seen people say the following, but in Brazil there's no trouble. These men need to justify their salaries. My dear brother, I ask you, would it be possible for me to send a surgeon, the best heart surgeon in Brazil, to change my car's tire? You would say no, wouldn't you, Davy? The surgeon wouldn't do that. You're mistaken, he actually would. It depends on how much I'm willing to pay for the service. Now, would it be cheap? Would the surgeon change my car's tire for the usual price? Or would I have to shell out a few million for him to submit to that humiliation? It's the same thing here. This kind of service the army has been doing is not a soldier's job. Wouldn't having an army be expensive for you? It has one of the largest budgets in Latin America, although it's small for the size of the territory, but it has one of the biggest funds in Latin America. And you use these men who should be training and preparing to defend the territory, and you put them to work in other services? Similarly, it's like having a surgeon change a tire. The job won't even be done well, because he didn't study for that. It's not his specialty. And it will be extremely expensive because I'm taking a professional away from his actual role. And he will charge for that. He will charge for the humiliation and so on. So why would anyone in their right mind do something like that? I don't know, I can imagine, but if I say it, maybe this video won't get approved. Now, what I can show you is the human costs of the open border. That cost is shown every day in our newspapers. Mothers crying over the loss of their children, young people recruited or killed by gangs. In the outskirts, entire cities are held hostage by our own version of Cangacho, where heavily armed criminals lock down towns in the countryside with weapons that should be used only by security forces, both civilian and military police. Facing state-of-the-art rifles inside our slums, fighting an asymmetric war where the criminal has more firepower than the local police officer. The violence that plagues Brazil is not some random accident. It is a direct result of the choice not to protect our borders. If drugs and weapons didn't come in through unprotected borders, the power of crime would wither in just a few months. Crime is only huge in Brazil because the supply is endless, and it's only endless. Because our borders have become a sieve due to political and budgetary decisions. The conclusion is this: a country that doesn't respect its soldiers is doomed to be dominated by its criminals. This isn't about discussing party preference, it's about discussing national survival. No serious country in the world gives up control of its borders. No sovereign nation leaves its armed forces neglected while organized crime prospers and dominates its territories. The warning from Enéas Carneiro resonates more strongly today than ever. It is necessary to restore the budget, the dignity, the authority, and the strategic role of the Brazilian army in protecting our land. We need to close the doors to drug trafficking, give our soldiers the support they need, and show that Brazil belongs to decent people, not to criminal factions. As long as we continue to accept the deterioration of our forces and the transformation of soldiers into the state's cleanup crew out of pure ideological revenge, we will keep paying the price. With the blood of innocent people on our streets, every day Brazil needs to wake up before it's too late. And if you allow me a suggestion, my brother, we need to say no to the left as if it were cancer. The left has always been the side of revenge. The left has always been the side of payback. The project has always been about power, not about improving the nation. A serious president, whoever comes in, will have to replace the entire high command, starting with the army. That way, the country and its people will have at least a minimal chance of having a decent life. Our resources could provide that, but they are being plundered every day across our borders. It's outrageous. This video ends here. I hope you enjoyed it and above all understood it. If that happened, my dear brother, hit the like button, share it, send this to your leftist friend who didn't understand why. Crime seems to have infinite power. You can imagine it's not easy to produce content like this, especially in these times. So they can keep being made, please share it, show it to more friends, because that's the only way we can be here together again. God bless you, my brothers, a hug, and I hope this humble video has helped you understand. Always facing the supernatural here on Encara News. Encara News. Fui!